The Smithsonian Faculty Fellowship Program represents a rewarding academic professional development opportunity for faculty at Montgomery College. The fellowships are a product of a unique collaboration between Montgomery College and the Smithsonian Center for Learning and Digital Access. It's the first of its kind between the Smithsonian Institution and a community college.
Ayafor earned a BA in English, an MA in Linguistics, and an MA in English Pedagogy in Cameroon. He earned a PhD in English Linguistics and Romance Languages at the European Center for Applied Linguistics, University of Freiburg, Germany. He has published 12 referenced scholarly articles and book chapters in internationally renowned journals such as the Journal of British and American Studies and Humanities. Ayafor recently published 2 solicited book chapters in The Africa We Know, a textbook which is used for the humanities program in the University of North Carolina at Raleigh.
My name is Isaiah, and I teach a couple of courses, but the one that we're talking about this afternoon is it's actually titled in the catalog, Reading Critically for Research. And I am still arguing with what I really want that title to say, which is just a point in the class that we have. In an argument class that you imagine, we would argue about, the slightest thing, even the words that we have here. But if you look at the main definition of the class, then you would thank the First Amendment. We want to be able to introduce students to the notion of having claims, supporting the claims, and using cultural and any kind of warrants to make the argument meaningful to audiences. So we usually start this class with trying to get students to settle down to the notion that the word argument is not what they typically know or what they imagine out of class. So a simple exercise of just helping them differentiate argument as a real method of making progress in issues that plague our communities, as opposed to altercation. It's what we take the first week to just get everybody to settle down. And then we get on to a very, what I call a very student-friendly textbook, Perspectives on Argument, which just says the work that we do in the class entirely. So the first problem that I usually have with this class is to get students to speak and actually use their First Amendment. So I do a couple of things at the beginning, including just asking people to tell other students in class what to think about, regular subjects around their lives and the communities in which they live in. And the reason for that is so that I get a sense of the perspective they have on topics. So we move into the first 2 assignments, which are 2 analytical papers that are aimed at preparing them for critical thinking, for one of the key notions that we learn in this project called object-based learning. I got tackled into this project by my dean for my own good. And this just goes to say how I started. And I think the fact that I knew that I could take challenges helped me out. And that also reflects the way my students started this class. So we both started a journey not really knowing what we were going to be doing or the difficulties that were going to be involved, but at least we knew that we came there for a grade, and that if we won that grade, we really have to, show up. And then I said, okay, if I have Sarah and Mimi and Manjul, I think I'm not going to fail. So we started off with just giving students the various topics that will help them reflect on the different assignments that we have in the class. And the theme of the American debate was settled on. And the reason we put that in quotes is just because we're not very, we don't want you to think in that class all we do is just go back and forth. It's a whole structured list of assignments that help students just get to the bottom of their personal responses, their total impressions about general topics like immigration, trade, war, culture, art, and politics. So when I suggested these topics to my students, then I followed up with a little check, a written check, little exercise just for them to write down something and help me out know what they think about Columbus, the Columbian experience. And here's what the first student came up with. And I'm going to just let you go through that a little bit. And the second student, Christopher Columbus, in my opinion, was a discoverer that American history portrayed as being a great founding explorer. I do not believe so. After taking a history course on Native Americans, I have come to believe he was more of a mass murderer and took the Native Americans' findings for his own. Columbus helped spread the diseases from Spain during that time, which ended up killing more Native Americans than American history would like you to publish. He was the cause of wars and took what the Americas had for granted. Brandon said, I feel that Christopher Columbus doesn't deserve a holiday. He came to the Americas and enslaved the local tribes to mine gold for him. He may have found America for the Europeans, but native people had been living there much longer. His arrival was the beginning of the fall of the Incan and Mayan Empire. And this is, the beginning of my learning from my students. The Spanish also stole huge amounts of gold. And so what do you think I did? I went into researching a little bit about the Incan and Mayan Empire, to just make sure that I know a little more into what this student is referring to, which is really one of my pedagogical goals, to be able to learn new things from my students. This one was, I was really particular about this one because I didn't want them to just think about the bad things that happen, that they've heard along the way, that they actually use the ideas about the Columbian experience to broaden their aspiration. So this student said, my personal experience of moving to this country has helped me understand many things. It has helped me understand that not everyone has the same privilege to come to a new country and get an education. Many other people move to many other countries for better opportunities, such as better jobs and education. Also, many of these people are sometimes forced to move to a different place, and other times it is their choice. Understanding other people's stories on why they migrate to other countries really helped me understand that not all of us move for the same reasons. So the negative things that the other students might have thought about, just put this student a little bit on a different category. The one who thinks about the Columbian experience as not so much something that only destroyed, but something that also helped to help people to think about their identity in new ways. After the two analytical papers that we wrote to introduce students to object-based analysis, then came the Smithsonian assignment. It is about 3 benchmarks for this assignment. The first one is just to pick a topic and have a conference with me and just help them situate their perspective on the topic, and then help them to link it to the Smithsonian project that they were going to do at the end of the paper. And then after that, they would go out and look for 6 to 10 sources that they will use to support their allegations and their conclusions in the research. Then comes the final paper, which is a 5 to 8 page document. The key thing that we look for is, are they able to understand the process of research documentation? Did they actually bring up at least 3 perspectives on the topic that they chose? Because the core of the class sets of students to be able to not only argue for, against, neutral, but to go beyond that and show that in one perspective you could get, maybe another 2 sub-perspectives. Like those who argue for, they only argue to this extent. So we have something we call the pentagon of perspectives, which is just a way of getting them to think about at least 5 perspectives on the topic that they chose. So then came the discussions that students settled on and the topics. These went from inventions in technology, immigration, war, trade, all the way to politics and diplomacy. And the one that nicely surprised me after teaching this course a number of semesters is the students who really went into historical events because they got inspired by the fact that we were going to do research on the Columbian experience. And they picked topics about the 1862 war. They picked topics about Lincoln and his war cabinet. And I was really surprised about that. At the time when I was arguing with the author of the textbook, who had decided in the newest edition to take out classical arguments from the text, like a letter from Birmingham jail, and other classical arguments that we usually have in the text. So that nicely surprised me. Then came time for student preparations. But before I talk about that, we had the first visit on the 17th of September. We all agreed, except one student who, of course, this happens in an argument class, who wanted to persuasively argue the fact that the Smithsonian project was a requirement. He was bent on putting that on the table, and we went back and forth. He ended up not going for that first meeting, but the following day, it was a Saturday, but the following day, Sunday, he decided to go on his own. And I was nicely surprised that he showed up with both of his parents. So that was great. Then we came back from the first visit, and as scheduled, everybody had to do a presentation. And I mean everybody, because this was going to be the one chance I was going to get the backbenchers to speak and get everyone who at least went there to show that they are using their First Amendment. So Brian was the first to go. He spoke about America and America's involvement in wars and and the use of war as an object of ascendancy in the world. And he's a politically informed student. So when he made some assertions, he was sure to bring a lot of information to support that assertion with. And the point was not to oppose him or argue or deny those. The point was to get him to do a lot more research and support those opinions. And that's all that the class was about. Then we went on to the domain of science and technology. And this student came in with a new perspective about the way technology has taken over the lives of young people. And I looked at him like, thank you for saying that, because in this category we have a lot of trouble with students who really argue that technology today has not taken over the life of young people. It helps them to do their work better and in different ways, which is excellent. However, they find it difficult to part with their phones in class for a short class of 15 minutes. And they find it difficult to come up to the front of the class and use, the media desk and do a presentation to enhance their ideas and show that they're using that technological advantage, in their favor. So those are just the kind of things that we debate in this class, in all of the activities that we do, and help them to to just put a new spin, a new perspective on anything that they would like to say to an audience and persuade them. Then Natalie Paul brought in one of the core topics that we discussed in that class. We had to go outside of the textbook and get readings from other textbook, because this is the area that was taken out of their textbook, the 8th edition that we were using. But all the previous editions had readings in immigration and new encounters. So she decided to fill in that gap, and she researched about the movement of Latino women into America and how their culture suffers two things. It dehumanizes the women that move from Latin America into America, and she cited the case of a novel that I used later on to actually do my own presentation. Isabel Allena's one of her novels, in which she actually portrays the passage of women from Latino cultures into America as a very destructive journey. Destructive culturally, psychologically, religiously, and most importantly, destructive to the family. Because those women leave their Latin American homes as the core, the fabric of the family. And when they go and do not return, then the family is broken. So her presentation was really one of those that gave the class some material to discuss, because in that class, I think up to about 9 students came from other countries. And so they could use that as a platform to think about their own movement to the United States. And then Brandon Brandon went back to this is the gentleman who nicely surprised me by going back in history and researching Lincoln and his cabinet, his war cabinet. Um, and when I spoke with him in my office, he didn't really like have any particular reason why he wanted to do that, but just because um, he wanted to get something that will help him associate and think think in the right direction as far as the Smithsonian project was concerned. He was just looking for something that will relate. But then he landed on a topic that I really like too. Julia was fascinated with men in progress. She wrote her paper on new discoveries, and that is why she was fascinated with the men in progress. I also learned from Julia that she thought all these people were actually talking to each other and discussing something really critical because of the posture. But then, when I went to that same picture, then I found out that none of these people ever sat close to each other. Not as we see there. These are just commissioned images that were brought separately together by the artist. And that was really revealing to me. Then Ms. Aguilar she has no background in Indian, she has no Indian background, but she was very fascinated with the story of the American Indians. And when we visited the National Museum of Indian American History, then she literally, her paper was based on Black Hawk, because she was looking at the influence of leadership in the response of American Indians to the imperialism of America at the time. So she took that picture, and that's one of the pictures that she used to support her paper. And those are my bodies at the National Museum of the American Indian. I think this was about 3/4 of the class. The others were still in the museum looking up images. Here are a few student quotes that dramatically compare to the opinions they had at the beginning of the class. The Smithsonian experience was a very rewarding experience because it opened my mind to using the museums as a means of information and sources. It was much more involving than researching something on Google, and it's fun and engaging. I did not go to most museums before this class, but it was my first time to know we had a portrait museum. I enjoyed it a lot and did recommend it to my friends. The most memorable moment was the film we saw at the American Indian Museum. It was really an eye-opener. So there's a short 13-minute film that just shows who the American Indians are, their lifestyle, their thought process, their culture, and a few other things. So most of the students said that was the moment that marked their visit. I personally like both of the museums we were in, and I would visit them again. The film on the American Indian Museum is very interesting, and the design of the building as well. In conclusion, the experience of going to the museum had a positive impact on me and I really recommend it to other students. I had, many more, but I didn't put them there. All right, these are two things for me, two things that I learned from the entire experience. This was my own moment. I came to learn that these two people shared equal talent. Ira Aldridge was the initial actor that played Shakespeare's Othello. And to tell you how good he was about it, a Russian critic actually said that he was Othello himself, as created by Shakespeare. Now, it amazed me that even that good, he could not give his country that talent, for the racial situation in the 60s. And he had to leave his country and take British nationality and give those talents to Britain for his entire life until he died in the UK. But as soon as he left, Edwin Forrest, a very extremely talented actor, jumped in and took over from there. He was very good. But then one of my students asked the question, was Forrest really good because Ira Aldridge was not there, or was he equally good in his own right? And that question remained with me until this moment. So I totally believe that the Smithsonian experience is the way forward for engaging students in this kind of class. I am planning to do it again, and to be able to use this material. I already gathered groundwork material to publish a paper on the notion on how I can use object-based learning to teach English in my classes. So I'm planning to work with this for a longer time. Thank you very much.